there would be no stars, no complex elements, no life. And then another astronomer named Lee Smolin concluded the probability of everything working out just right to be 1 chance in 10 to the power of 229. So guys, these are not Christians. Dinesh D'Souza says he's a Christian, but for the rest of these guys, they don't claim to be Christians. They claim they're atheists. They don't believe in any God. And they look at our universe and they say, something has fine-tuned it. Rather than concluding that it is God, they go to great lengths to say the universe brought us forth in order to be known. Alien minds have monkeyed with the physics. And by the way, these are people that say that they don't entertain the idea of the belief in God because that is not scientific. So scientists want to explain things through science, not through religion. But when you resort to saying alien minds from other universes and universes making us to be known, you're getting into religious stuff there. You're getting outside of science with those comments. These are people that just don't want there to be a God. And these are the people that will say that you're not smart if you believe in God. Oh, we believe in science. Well, what does the science tell you? That an alien mind from another universe has monkeyed with our physics. That's not science, and that's not smart. So it is possible for us to believe in God and be smart, isn't it? If they can believe in alien minds and call themselves smart, we can believe in a supreme being and call ourselves smart. But now, I just want you to see that even non-Christians believe in this anthropic principle, that our world is fine-tuned for us. So what are some of the things that are fine-tuned for us? Well, think about gravity. When we think about gravity, we might think about the moon, how things would just kind of float off into space. So we have gravity here on this planet, but the gravity that we have, if it were any lighter, then we would float away like people do on the moon. But if you reverse that, if the gravity we had were any stronger, we would not be able to stand up, let alone walk and run and jump. The amount of gravity that we have on planet Earth is just right for us to be able to jump and come back down, to stand up and not float away. It is just right for us to live on this planet. In the same way, the gravitational and electromagnetic forces of this planet are just right. If you were to tweak the numbers just a little bit, we would lose the energy that the sun provides for us. And speaking of the sun, it is at the perfect distance away from the earth to support life. Do you know how far away we are from the sun? Does anybody know the number? 93 million miles. Exactly right, Jack. We are 93 million miles away from the sun. And so we are rotating or revolving around the sun while also spinning like a top, where it takes 365 days to go around the sun once and 24 hours to make one rotation around on our axis, all while moving at about 1,002 miles per hour. I don't know how they clocked us at 1,002 miles per hour, but that's what they say. If you were to speed that up, we would fly off of this planet. But if you were to slow it down, we would not have the seasons that we have. Our summers and winters, our growing seasons, planting and harvest. We have those things because we're the right distance from the sun and we're moving at the right speed away from the sun and around the sun. If we were a little bit closer to the sun, we would burn up. If we were a little bit farther away from the sun, we would freeze. The next planet past us is Mars. Mars reaches temperatures of 70 degrees below zero. Mercury, closer to the sun, reaches temperatures of 860 degrees Fahrenheit. You talk about global warming. If we were to go where Mercury is, we would have some real climate change. But we are positioned exactly where we need to be. It's not too hot. You might say it's too hot right now, but that's just August. But if we were to be any closer to the sun, forget August, we would be incinerated. But as it is now, we have the sunlight and the warmth that we need, and we also have the winters that we need so that we get respite from the heat. And I mentioned how we are rotating on our axis, but we are at a 23-degree tilt on our axis. That 23-degree tilt allows for the North and South Pole to never be too cold and for the equator to never be too hot. Do you know what causes that 23-degree tilt on our axis? The moon causes that. So if we were farther away from the moon or closer to the moon, we would not have that right angle that we're supposed to be at. So our proximity to the moon, as well as the sun, and the sun and moon's proximity to each other are all just right for us to have this life that we need on the sun. As we're going around the sun, we go in a tight circular pattern, but every other planet in the Milky Way goes in an elliptical pattern, kind of like reaching points, more like an oval than a circle. That means that twice a year, every other planet is farther away from the sun than it is for the majority of the year. If we were to do that, we would lose, it's been estimated, we would lose about half of our growing capacity, meaning the plants, the vegetables, the fruit, the things that we grow, we would lose about 50% of that if we were in a different pattern like the other planets in our solar system are. We could go on and on and on with these things in the anthropic principle, the Goldilocks principle. But I think you get the point. And at the risk of boring you with the same things over and over, just suffice it to say that there are so many things in our universe that are just right to support life here on this planet. Lee Strobel, if you've ever read his The Case For books, in his book, The Case for the Creator, he said this: Earth's location, its size, its composition, its structure, its atmosphere, its temperature, its internal dynamics, and its many intricate cycles that are essential to life, the carbon cycle, oxygen cycle, nitrogen cycle, phosphorus cycle, sulfur cycle, calcium cycle, sodium cycle, and so on. They testify to the degree to which our planet is exquisitely and precariously balanced. So I like how Lee Strobel concluded that. I mean, it's just a picture of the fact that our planet is exactly what it needs to be. Now, if you want another good quote, can you put up the one from Charles Darwin, please? Charles Darwin, not a believer, right? But he has given us a way to evaluate his method. He said this: if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Charles Darwin has given us a gold nugget with this quote here. It's as if somebody said, Mr. Darwin, if we were to go 150 years into the future and look back and evaluate you, what would be the thing that would either confirm it or disprove it? Because now we live in a much more modern and scientific era than what Charles Darwin lived in. And Charles Darwin said, if you can disprove my theory on this one thing, if you can prove that those things which are complex came into, what's beeping? If you can prove that those things came into being all at once, rather than what he said, by numerous, successive, slight modifications, he said that would completely change whether he's right or wrong. So what do we know today in 2023 that he did not know in 1859 when he wrote on the origin of species? What we know today is that what we have, what we can observe, what we can study, had to come into being all at once, spontaneously, not through numerous, successive, and slight modifications. What Darwin theorized is that those things which are complex, like human beings, we did not just arrive on this planet all at once. We came from things that were smaller and simpler. So in his day, with the naked eye, you could look at things like primates and people and say, those are complex, those are near the end of the line. But you can look at those things that are simpler, like the smallest cells that he could see, and say, well, those things are small. Those things could have come into existence and then slowly change themselves over time. Not all at once, but through numerous, slight, successive changes. Those things that are simple can become more complex. That's what Charles Darwin said. So let's think about these things that he once thought were simple, and we now know that they are not. If you have the quote, please, from Francis Crick. He's the man who discovered DNA. Francis Crick said, "The cell is thus a miniature factory bustling with rapid, organized chemical activity. Nature invented the assembly line years before Henry Ford. Nancy Percy, in her book Total Truth, she expounded on that. She said this: each cell is akin to a miniature factory town, humming with power plants, automated factories, and recycling centers. In the nucleus is a cellular library housing blueprints and plans that are copied and transported to factories, each of which is filled with molecular machines that function like computerized motors. The outside surface of the cell is studded with sensors, gates, pumps, and identification markers to regulate traffic coming in and out. Each cell is like a train station where tracks crisscross yet never collide. And so then, Leslie, if you could put up the picture of the cell, please. This is the tiniest thing that Charles Darwin could see with his eye. And he said that the cell, that's easy for that to come from non-life. This cell could emerge from a warm pond billions of years ago and become the foundation for everything else as we know it. Well, now we're able to dissect that cell. This is just a drawing, but this is what is the cross-section of a tiny cell, something that we look at under a microscope. And you don't have to be able to read all of that stuff or even understand what any of that stuff is. I'll be honest, I don't know what half of that stuff is. But without being able to identify it, the point remains the same. Charles Darwin couldn't see any of that stuff. Look at all that. You take this microscopic cell and you cut it open and you see all this activity, like a miniature factory, the founder of DNA said. Power plants humming with activity. Trains, recycling centers, things running all through it. Blueprints. It has a brain. It has intelligence. This is the tiniest thing that we know in life. So Charles Darwin would never have said, oh, yeah, humans, they just arrived on this planet. No, it took billions of years of these things evolving themselves. And Charles Darwin said, if you can prove that this didn't happen, then my theory falls apart. Well, it's easy to prove that this didn't happen. How is this the simplest thing that just crawled out of a warm pond one day? The idea that this could have just evolved itself through slight modification is absurd because of this thing I want to talk to you about tonight as we wind down, this concept of irreducible complexity. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but in 1996, a man named Michael Behe wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box, and he referred to this cell as Darwin's black box. He said Darwin was not able to look inside that cell in his lifetime, but we are now able to open that box and take a peek inside, and he said this cell blows up Darwin's theory. And he referred to this as irreducible complexity. Everything in life can be reduced down until you reach a point where it cannot reduce any further and still function. So if you could put up, Leslie, the last picture of a mouse trap. Michael Behe used the example of a mouse trap in his book, and we've all seen a mouse trap like this, but he uses this as his example. So let's think about it. Let's apply Darwinian evolution to this mouse trap. Let's say that the first thing to evolve was just a simple piece of wood. We don't know how the wood evolved itself. We don't know where the material came from, but this piece of wood crawled out of a warm pond someday, right? Because Darwin never answers the question of origin. He just starts with existing material. So we'll say that there was a warm pond and a piece of wood crawled out of it. Can a piece of wood catch and kill mice? Well, no. So through numerous, successive, slight modifications, this piece of wood evolved a spring for itself. Now, not overnight, that would be silly, but it took millions of years. But a piece of wood in a spring can't catch and kill any mice, can it? So it needed that bar on the end. So through numerous, successive, slight modifications, it evolved a bar for itself. Over millions of years, of course, that can't happen overnight. And then all the other things that it needed, the little hook on the end, and eventually a piece of cheese, and even the company logo right there on the piece of wood. Now you have a fully functioning mousetrap. But the problem is, if you reduce this down to the bare minimum number of working parts, what can you reduce from this and still have a mousetrap? We can get rid of the logo. We can reduce that down. But after you reduce down the company logo, what else can you subtract and still have a working mousetrap? Nothing, right? So this is irreducible. Michael Behe called this irreducible complexity. We cannot reduce this down to anything less complex and still have a mousetrap. You take out the spring, you don't have a working mousetrap. You take out the hook, you don't have a working mousetrap. Take out the cheese, you're probably not going to catch a mouse. So if we apply this to Darwinian evolution, we say it's either all there, all at once, simultaneously working, or it never could come into existence on its own. Apply that to the human body. What does it take to make your body work? You need a skeletal system, a muscular system, a digestive system, a respiratory system, a nervous system, a reproductive system, and on and on and on. Without those things, each and every one of those things, you do not exist. Imagine saying, I have a skeletal system but no digestive system. How would you eat? Or even if we acquired all the things that we need without a reproductive system, we would die off and not have any offspring. We need all of those things, each and every one of them working together, or we do not exist. Irreducible complexity. That's not just true of human beings. You take Darwin's chart and go all the way down to those little jellyfish and little slimy things at the bottom of the chart, and they need all of those working parts simultaneously, or they don't exist. Remember what I said last week about that gap theory and said, well, if you have on day 3, you have plant life, but no sun for millions of years, you can't have plants for millions of years with no sun. In the same way, you can't have an animal with a skeletal system, but no digestive system for millions of years while it's making slight successive modifications to itself. It would die of starvation. Without a reproductive system, it would die off without being able to reproduce. Without a muscular system, without a respiratory system. It needs every one of those things or it does not exist. Charles Darwin said, those simple cells, they just modified themselves over time. Michael Behe says, not so fast. You cannot reduce life down to some working parts but not others and still have life. So by Charles Darwin's own standard, if you evaluate him by what he said, if you can prove that there were not numerous successive modifications, and I think we can now prove that. I think you can take everything Charles Darwin said now and throw it out the window based on his own admission. Maybe in 1859 that was okay. But in 2023, you've got to stick your head in the sand to still believe in Darwin's theories. By his own theory, it doesn't hold up. And that is why time is the key ingredient for evolution. I was being facetious when I said that a minute ago. Not overnight, but millions of years, because nobody would ever believe that would happen overnight. If I took my cell phone, smashed it with a hammer into a million pieces, and put it in a shoebox, and we all walked in here in the morning and took the lid off, would my cell phone be assembled back together in working order? Oh, of course not. Well, what if we gave it a week? Would it come together and form itself over a week? Well, no, not in a week, in a month. A year? A century? But we say, well, what about over billions of years? And suddenly we say, well, billions of years, okay. If it's impossible now, it's impossible with billions of years. But evolutionists would have you believe that by adding time, that which is impossible suddenly becomes possible. But that's just not true. Does 2 + 2 = 5? Not today, not tomorrow, and not in a billion years. 2 + 2 will never equal 5, no matter how much time we allow. And if a smashed cell phone will not put itself back together over billions of years, it's just as absurd to say that pond scum turned into people over billions of years. If it's impossible overnight, if it's impossible over hundreds of years, it's impossible altogether. But evolutionists will just keep saying billions of years because, well, no one's around to observe billions of years, right? We might be around to observe a few decades, but you and I, we're not going to be able to watch for billions of years and say, I told you so. We've been watching for a billion years and it never happened. Well, they know we can't do that. And so they just insert time into the equation to give themselves just a shred of chance. So the thing is, as Christians, we need to believe that God created the heavens and the earth. We looked at those verses last week from Genesis 1, John 1, Colossians 1, the book of Job. So many passages where we see that God is the creator of life. So Leslie, if you could put up, I have one last slide, just a simple verse, Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 4. It says, "For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God." On our street, it's a new construction. Ours was the first house. We're watching all these houses go up. And so since the day we moved in, there have been crews. They're on the last house right now, but there have been crews building houses from the time we've been there. It's been kind of fun watching them go up, watching them clear trees, foundation, all the way up. Nobody would ever believe that those houses just appeared on their own. Say, where'd that house came from? Oh, you're not going to believe it. It's the craziest thing. I left for work this morning. There was no house. I came home. There was a house there. Nobody would ever believe that. It is so elementary that every house is built by someone. And I said last week, every painting had a painter. Every building has a builder. And creation has a creator. God is the builder of all things. How can we ever try to explain any of this stuff apart from God? So our opening question was random chance or intelligent design? Did we get super, super lucky? Or was there really a super intellect that monkeyed with the physics? I believe that there is a God that made all of this on purpose. The odds of all of those things being just right, gravity and proximity to the sun and the seasons that we have and the spinning of the earth, all these things that we looked at to be just right, subtract one of those things and we don't have life. Move us closer to the sun or farther away, increase gravity, reduce gravity, speed up the planet, slow down the planet, change any one of those things, and we don't have life. So this is either random chance or it's intelligent design. We didn't just get lucky, folks. There is a God that made us by design and on purpose. And he did that for a reason then, didn't he? If God did all this, what was his reason? Well, one of those guys said the universe wanted to be known. Okay, I believe God wanted to be known. He wants to be known by us. He wants to have a relationship with us. Which would you rather believe? Put all the science aside. Which would you rather believe? That we got here purely by luck? Or that there is a very powerful God out there that made you and a planet perfect for you so that you can be loved by him and be in a relationship with him? Second one sounds a lot better, doesn't it, to you? I love the fact that there is an intelligent designer that made us on purpose and then wants to be in a relationship with us. So when we get this idea that, oh, God hates me and God can't wait to punish me and guys, God did all of this because he loves us and he wants you to talk to him in your prayer life, to read his word, to grow closer to him, to fellowship with him. He did all this to be known by us. So let's do that. Let's work on our relationship with God. So as we continue through in anthropology, we're going to talk about what went wrong. How did we get here? Well, God made us. Did he make us perfect, or did he make this cursed world? Well, something went wrong along the way, so we're going to look at that next. But I believe that's how we got here, through an intelligent designer God. So any questions or comments or prayer requests or anything else before we conclude tonight? Who was that? Who said? Oh, all right. Well, guys, thank you all for being here. I appreciate seeing each and every one of you here tonight. Look forward to Sunday and being back in our place if I don't see you before then. Today was the first day of school, so keep our students, faculty, and everybody in your prayers. Looked like a really good first day. A lot of energy back on campus. We were excited about that. Would someone like to close us in a word of prayer tonight, and then we'll be dismissed? Anybody? Thank you, Mr. David.